This scene was not a common occurrence in the mid-1800s. The Rankin House, located here in Ripley, Ohio, was one of the many stations slaves would travel to make their way to freedom via the Underground Railroad. It is told that many slaves would make their way across the Ohio River with only the light of a single lantern to guide them to the house high upon the hill. Until it was safe, Reverend John Rankin and his family risked it all to clothe, feed, and stow them away. Once safe, they would continue their quest to freedom on the Underground Railroad.
The Rankin House, a symbol of hope, comfort, solace, and security. A dream for most and only a reality for a few. But before we reflect on the lives of the Rankins, there were other families in Ripley who displayed throughout a tumultuous time great bravery, dignity, and nobility, making our community a beacon of freedom for those who had no voice.
White row house, that was a home of the founder of Ripley, Colonel James Poole. He was also an anti-slavery sympathizer. He was one of the earliest abolitionists in Ripley. Dr. Alexander Campbell, he's considered Ohio's first abolitionist, coming to the area in 1804. He was very early speaking out against slavery and acting upon his belief that slavery was wrong.
I am now sitting on the stairs in the McKeag house, and Catherine and Thomas McKeag were very active on the Underground Railroad and very, very in the background. One of the great stories is that Thomas McKeag only wanted to do it at night, and his wife believed that that no matter at what time of day a fugitive slave arrived at their house, they would help.
In her book, Beyond the River, Anne Hagedorn delves into the history of our community's involvement with the Underground Railroad. We had an exclusive interview with Miss Hagedorn about Rankin's ties with other abolitionists.
Rankin told Harriet Beecher Stowe the story of the woman crossing the ice, and then she became Eliza in Uncle Tom's Cabin. On a blustery night in late February 1838, somewhere across the river from Ripley, the ice was breaking under the weight of an animal's body. Or was it the body of a human? The man standing on the banks of the Ohio side near the mouth of Red Oak Creek wasn't exactly sure what was causing the sounds he heard. His gun at his side, his ears primed to every discernible sound, his body wrapped in several coats to brace against the chill of the river winds, Chauncey Shaw had roamed these banks nearly every night since the river froze on February 22nd, waiting, hoping, and listening for the sounds he was now hearing, the telltale sounds of the struggle of a slave escaping across the river. Slave catchers like Shaw knew that when the river froze, the temptation for slaves to cross the icy road to freedom was sometimes too great to resist. Like the buzzards crisscrossing the sky above the river, the manhunters scouted the banks at night, watching the spots where skiffs had landed runaway slaves in the past, and waiting.
Rankin House was the home of Reverend John Rankin, a Presbyterian minister and an ardent abolitionist.
Due to his abolitionist views, John Rankin moved his family from Tennessee to Ripley, Ohio in 1822. taking the post as a minister of the Presbyterian Church.
Why did Ripley become such a gateway to freedom, as they call it? And part of it is about geography. Geography always rules, right? And so Ripley has a network of streams. So these little geographical details really abetted the escape paths. Of course, it worked both ways because that made it just as easy for slave catchers to come across the river.
Rankin, by all accounts, was a modest person. He was not a boastful man, but he took a great deal of pride in his autobiography when he wrote, "I never lost a passenger. I am an abolitionist. I teach the doctrine that all men are born equally free and independent, that we must love our neighbors as ourselves, that to buy, to sell, to hold human beings as property is sin. I do not recognize the slaveholder's right to the flesh and blood and souls of men and women. Fugitive slaves in the care of this family were never caught by their owners or by bounty hunters and taken back into slavery." And he and his family were very proud of that fact.
Basically, what the Underground Railroad was a network of people who were bound together by a very strong belief that human bondage was wrong.
Through the hardships of John Rankin's secret life, his wife and many children assisted him through the long days and nights. Local reenactor Thelma Poff gives us an insight on the family's view.
She had 13 children, and she lived on a farm up on the hill. They farmed that whole hillside, you know, from the Rankin house now that's all woods and trees.
The period of the Underground Railroad was a difficult, dangerous time. Dangerous to be a slave and attempt an escape, because the sad truth about the Underground Railroad is more people who attempted escapes failed than were successful.
You know, it didn't happen all the time. You know, that's kind of a myth. But when it did happen, of course, the escapes had to be dealt with immediately, and it was not a safe thing to be involved in.
A short time to talk because my kids were up on the hill, and the day before there was we had some excitement because the officials here in Ripley came up, and they said, and my husband was gone at that time. He was out on one of his preaching missions, and so they heard that we were harboring some slaves up there, which we did. We put them in the barn and in the basement and hid them all over, you know, and we had a cellar that we'd put them in.
People who made the decision to become Underground Railroad conductors, abolitionists, were taking tremendous risks also.
They organized for something they believed in, and they devoted their lives to something larger than themselves.
Although the Rankins seemed to be a very peaceful family, others didn't seem to think so. The first few weeks following their move to Ripley, John Rankin had many protesters follow him around the town, and he also experienced attacks on his home at night.
They came up and they had their shotguns like this, and they said, "Miss Rankin, we come today to get those slaves you're hiding." And I said, "Oh, we don't have any slaves hidden in our house." And my little 8-year-old son Calvin came out, and he said, and he had the big shotgun that my husband had, and he held this shotgun down, looked down the hill at him, and he said, we don't have any slaves here. And he said, "You get off our property or I'll blast you."
Some of the houses on Front Street, I discovered windows in the original houses that were involved in the Underground Railroad, and they're still standing and restored and taken very good care of. And a lot of them have windows. They all have one window on the second story that perfectly frames Rankin's house. It's almost an architectural story, the story of people with houses that have hidden rooms in their cellars or behind fireplaces where slaves were hidden.
We feel the hand of oppression not only upon the slave, but upon ourselves. Where I live, my soul is harrowed continually with the cruelties committed in sight of my house, where slavery exists in its mildest form. I rejoice in the triumph of principles of immediate emancipation because I know from long observation that it is the only thing that can relieve both master and slave from inevitable ruin.
You know that she had to bake a lot of bread and make preserves and that because you didn't run to the grocery and get things, so she had to be an extremely busy woman. She had to be a very brave woman. And Reverend Rankin was out preaching around and working toward abolition, and so she had to carry on a lot of these things all alone with the children, so I can't imagine what kind of woman she was.
His letter reads, "As various false reports are in circulation respecting the recent attack made upon me and my family by midnight assassins, perhaps it may be interesting to the public to have a statement of the facts in the case. Reports reach me that people of that city were threatening to come to Ripley and tear down my house. Thus I have been attacked at midnight with fire and weapons of death, and nothing but the good providence of God has preserved my property from flames and myself and family from violence and death. Why then am I beset with armed men around my house at midnight? Because I am an abolitionist. These men came to sustain the slaveholder's claim to human beings as property. Such defense well becomes the dark system of slavery. I therefore forewarn all persons to beware lurking about my house and barn at night. When I am put upon the necessity of standing guard over my family and property, I shall not do it in vain."
So in 50, 60 years, we've come a long way. It's up to you guys to keep it going so that maybe someday everybody will be recognized for who they are and not what color their skin is.
In the fall of 2013, the archaeology firm of Gray and Pape performed an archaeological dig in areas around the Rankin house and discovered many lost treasures.
My name is Brian Mabilitini. I'm with Gray and Pape out of Cincinnati, Ohio, and we're doing archaeology here at the Rankin house to look for the summer kitchen, which we've identified here. And what we've got exposed right now is a section of a walkway that would have been around the building. And over on this side is the foundation stones of the building. We have this line of foundations coming up the corner back here, which turns in that direction. One of the main questions we're trying to answer is whether or not this kitchen was attached to the house. And these units we're hoping will answer those questions.
Hello, my name is Morgan Wampler. I'm the data manager on this site. So basically what I do is kind of maintain all of our records and make sure no contexts get mixed and that everything stays very organized. So once the artifacts come out of the ground, they go to the screen. And once they go to the screen, they come into these little bags, which we have that we record the unit, the square that they came out of, and the level. So we have our X, Y, and Z vertices recorded. And from here, I'll enter it into my computer database, and then we send it to the lab. And from the lab, it'll get further analyzed, and then eventually the artifacts will become curated. And then some will end up in museums, others will be accessed by other researchers with other research questions.
The first thing we do, one of the early steps is doing some archival research on the site, especially on a historic site like this. And to set up in the field, if you notice, we have these strings and squares. So we'll lay out a grid across the site so that we can sample in discrete units to keep track of where artifacts are coming from. And our blocks are 1 meter by 1 meter square, which is roughly 3 feet. And then when we excavate, we will excavate in a soil strata, which is the color of the dirt. As it changes, we'll keep that separate. We'll go down to the subsoil, which predates human occupation. This side is roughly 20 centimeters to that subsoil. But in case in the middle we have a cellar feature that we know is there, so that will go deeper.
Reverend John Rankin and his fellow abolitionists paved the way for racial equality with their many contributions to the Underground Railroad. Even after his death in 1886, Reverend Rankin's legacy still lives on today and is a proud reminder of our area's past.